everyone, and welcome to the channel. I'm back to break down my final thoughts on this Week 10 NFL DFS slate on DraftKings. Before we get into it, if you could please leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell so you'll be notified every time I upload new content. That'd be greatly appreciated, and it'll help you so you won't miss any new videos when they're uploaded. I have released multiple packages over there on Patreon. Go ahead and check those out, linked in the description, where you can get access to all of my projections, my matchup charts, my play calling pace charts, my target sheets, and my cheat sheets, etc. So go ahead and check that out if interested. And behind me on the screen, we do have what my QB exposures will be this week. I've narrowed it down to this list, giving you guys a sneak peek of that. But for the full sheet, all my QB projections, all my running back projections, every single position, check that out. And with that being said, let's go ahead and start breaking down my final thoughts. So I guess we'll go game by game here, looking at the Vegas totals and just talking down position by position as well, and kind of, where I'm at as far as my priority. So as far as the QB position, Kyler Murray, definitely a viable option today, probably the top QB slate on the QB play on the slate, and he's priced that way. I mean, he's at 8K on DraftKings. But for good reason. The guy gets the job done on the ground. He gets the job done through the air. And while the Buffalo Bills don't exactly have, they don't exactly supply the best matchup, we can see that this game is getting a lot of respect from Vegas. The total has been climbing even higher than it was earlier in the week, and it opened up as a pretty high total. Currently, when looking at the live lines, we can see that the Cardinals have got a 2.5 bump in their point total, and the Bills have got a point bump in theirs as well. And then when taking a look at the over-under, it's a line that opened at 52, and it's up to 55.5. So Vegas does like this game to definitely put some points on the board. I mean, the game's climbed to a total of 3.5 points. So you got to like Kyler Murray, and of course, if you're playing him, you're going to want to be stacking up with his weapons on the outside, and Christian Kirk and DeAndre Hopkins. Obviously, DeAndre Hopkins is the first guy that you want to be putting in your lineups, as he's an elite receiver. But then also, I wouldn't forget about Kirk on the other side of this ball, because I do think that he's in a good spot to go off, and he's at 5'7". And as I always like to say, if I'm playing a quarterback, I'm playing him with two of his pass-catching threats in tournaments, because I think that looking at the data, looking at the historical data, that's what's winning you these tournaments. Christian Kirk's been the guy that's getting in the end zone in all these games. So there's been a lot of Hopkins owners out there that are disappointed, but I do think that stacking both of these guys up with Kyler Murray is the way to go. And that's how I'd be approaching this side of the game. I also do have interest on the other side of the ball in Josh Allen and this offense. I mean, if you're looking at the target share, it's very obvious where the ball's going. And then when you're looking at Josh Allen's game logs, he's a guy that does get the job done on the ground as well. I think that's common knowledge if you've been playing fantasy football for a while now. But if you don't know, I mean, Josh Allen's one of the best running QBs in the league. So while he does provide the upside as far as passing, he can also get the job done on the ground. And with such a high total, I think he will be supplying you fantasy stats in both ways. And then as far as his options are concerned, Stephon Diggs leads the league in targets this year. He's a guy that's just got an absurd workload: 12 targets, 9 targets, 11 targets, 8 targets his last few games. Hasn't really had a big game since week 2 against Miami, where he went off for 32 points. But 20, 23, 23, 16, 10, 15. I mean, in a spot that the total's climbing, I do think that Stephon Diggs is definitely a viable option with all the targets that he gets. And then I'm looking to stack the other side with John Brown. He would be the second guy I'm looking to pair up with Josh Allen. We saw him have 11 targets last week out. He did get to take on the Seattle Seahawks, which is the best matchup in the league as far as wideouts and QBs and everything, really. Their secondary has been terrible. So while he did have a big week, just take that for what you will. However, we did see the targets at 11 targets, and I think that will continue to happen. And I do think that John Brown's the other guy I want to be stacking up with my Josh Allen stacks. So I like that spot. Moving further along, as far as the spots I'm looking at, the Seattle Rams game, definitely have interest in Russell Wilson, definitely have interest in Jared Goff. When looking at the Vegas totals, we can see that One sec, we got to go down to the 425 slot. And um, the implied open total was at 27 for the Seahawks and 28.5 for the Rams. And we've seen it drop 1 point for the Seahawks, but nothing's changed on the Rams side of the ball. So the live line has dropped a point, but I mean, I don't think that's really a big deal. That's more about the spread and the projected winner, I think. As far as the total and the impact of the game, I don't really think that's anything to worry about. And I just love how both sides of the ball, it's very easy to predict where the ball is going, and that's what we like in our stacks. We want upside, and we want to pick the guys that are getting the touchdowns, of course. So on the Seahawks side of the ball, you got to start with Russell Wilson, of course. One of the best fantasy QBs this year, get the job done week in, week out, and his team's been playing from behind a lot, and they are the underdogs in this game as well. So you like to see that because when they get down, they have to throw a lot. 34, 34, 39, 24. Pretty much pushing 30 DK points a week. So you love to see that. And then when you're looking at his weapons on the outside, it's very clear as to who we're looking to target. First starting with DK Metcalf. Guy's been an absolute beast. Going off week in and week out. When looking at his game log, we can see 26.8, 43.1. He threw up a dud in week 7 with 4, but then 27, 17, 23, just going off. Pretty much every week, at least 20 DK points. No pun intended. So you like to see that. And then on the other side, you got Tyler Lockett, who I do think is a great tournament option this week because of how much he's let us down the last 2 weeks. He's a guy that was very, very popular as of late, and he hasn't got it done. So I love that as far as tournaments are concerned. Everyone's going to be scared to play him. Everyone's kind of mad that he's let him down the last few weeks. And we can take advantage of that because if we play him, we're going to get him at lower ownership than he should be, I'm guessing. And I love that because you can see his upside. He had 56 points in week 7 against Arizona, and I definitely think he can get back to a big game, bouncing back from his 8 and 7 point total. And then on the other side of the ball, I absolutely love these Rams stacks this week because the Seattle Seahawks, as I mentioned earlier, are very terrible. Their secondary is terrible and, once again, very predictable as to where the ball is going for these Rams. Jared Goff, a guy that has some extreme chemistry with Cooper Kupp on the outside. So Cooper Kupp in the slot's the first guy that I want to talk about. I love Cooper Kupp this week. Last week, I had mentioned he had 20 targets. That just goes to show how much Jared Goff loves this guy. You don't see that very often. I don't know if I have seen that in a long time. I don't know. 20 targets is an extreme amount. Of course, you're looking to get double-digit targets, but when you're talking 20, that's just absurd. So Cooper Kupp, a guy that I love this week, taking on this week's Seattle secondary, and I love the other guy on the side of the ball in Robert Woods. His partner in crime, so to speak, 28 points last week, 6 points the week before, 14, 17, but it's the matchup. The Seattle Seahawks matchup, I think he's going to bring out the best in both of these guys. I think they both have a ton of upside, and I like going to them this week. So yeah, I mean, as far as going through all my stacks and stuff, these are the QBs that I'm correlated with, but I don't want to forget about the other positions as well. So I want to go over to running back and talk about some of the top options I'm looking here. Aaron Jones is a guy that I have a ton of interest in. Getting reports that there could be up to 50-mile-an-hour winds in this Green Bay game, and when that happens, there's going to be a lot of runs. It's going to be a very run-heavy game plan, in my opinion. And it's not like Aaron Jones has had a really big week in a while, so maybe that'll keep his ownership lower. People love to log into the app, look at the game logs, and say, oh, who's doing good? Who has the most fantasy points? And that's not really the best way to go. We want to break this down from a matchup standpoint, from a game script standpoint. I do think they're going to have to run the ball a lot with those winds blowing. So less interest in the passing attack for Green Bay and more interest in the run. And I definitely have interest in Aaron Jones in this one. I think he's going to get a heavy workload. And then when you're looking at the implied team total for this Packers team this week, they are up to about 30 points. Last time I had looked at the line, and if there hasn't been any line change, I'm guessing they're right there. Their implied total is at a 30.75 line. That's 30 points expected to score, and I have a hard time believing that Aaron Jones isn't going to be a big part of that when we're factoring all these weather conditions. So I definitely like Aaron Jones. Next guy I want to talk about is James Conner in this Pittsburgh-Cincinnati game. A team that's favorited, and a guy who I definitely think can take advantage in this matchup since he hasn't been the best against running backs, and James Conner's ground and pound type of guy, put his head down and run through the gap. So I think that with the matchup and the yards given up on the ground that this team has supplied to opposing running backs, I definitely have an interest in James Conner. At 6.9K, I definitely think he is a viable option. And then I want to talk about Robinson for the other side of the ball. The only thing that James Robinson has going against him this week is the game script, as I had mentioned. I think that the Packers are going to be up big in this game, so unfortunately, that's a little unfortunate because they're probably going to have to throw the ball. However, with that being said, with the wins and complications, I think there's going to be a lot of checkdowns to James Robinson, and the Packers are one of the worst teams in the league against running backs. So a guy that had 34 points against the Chargers in Week 7, who kind of came back down to earth a little bit with a 15-point total, but he's been consistent, and he has had some big games, 30, 24, and I think he can get back on track with another big game in this one, taking on the Packers. My projections really like him this week. So another guy to have interest in. Moving further along, a guy I want to talk about for tournaments is definitely Miles Sanders for these Philadelphia Eagles taking on the Giants. This is a game that I do have some interest in the passing attack as well, but I think that Sanders is in a good spot to get it done on the ground. He's seen his usage bump up a little bit. I mean, he's not a heavy workhorse running back with only 11 to 9, 13 attempts compared to 20 and 18 in Week 1 and 2. But I do think that he's in this mid-range where he could go low, and I do think that he has the upside to get it done this week. So I don't want to just drop him from my exposures, because if he goes out there and has a big game, you're not going to want to miss out on that. Antonio Gibson, a guy that's in a great matchup this week, taking on the Detroit Lions. The Detroit Lions have been the worst team in the league against running backs this week, this year, as far as DK points given up a game, just not getting the job done against running backs. And I do think that Antonio Gibson is starting to see an increase in workload. He only had 6 last week, but I think that had something to do with they were behind in the game, and really they were just putting McKissick in to just keep throwing. And I don't think that's going to be the case in this week's game. I think they're going to stay in it. And we saw him have 20 attempts against Dallas. I think that he can get back to more of a heavy workload like that. And there was concern about an injury earlier in the week, but he did practice in full on Thursday, so I like Antonio Gibson as an option. And the two top options, well, first, before we get to those two guys, as far as salary relief are concerned, we have two big salary relief options this week. But Gio Bernard's also an option because Joe Mixon has been ruled out. He has to take on the Pittsburgh Pirates, which is not a good matchup. And that's kind of why my appeal on him is a little bit limited. However, with that being said, I do think we can get him low-owned. And he is going to be the sole running back in the backfield with Joe Mixon out. So, and you can see over the past 2 games, he's gotten the job done with 20 and 22 fantasy points. So don't want to skip over him. But the two guys that I'm really interested in on the salary relief this week is definitely one in Duke Johnson and 2 Mike Davis. Both of these guys are looking really good on my projections as far as their upside and their price tags. Duke Johnson gets to take on a Cleveland Browns team who's been pretty mediocre against the run. We saw him last week when David Johnson got removed from the game. He had 16 attempts, 41 yards, and a touchdown. I think he can get back to a similar line this week. Jacksonville is a great matchup. I think he's got a pretty similar good matchup. Not as good as Jacksonville. Jacksonville's one of the worst teams against the run, but Cleveland, mediocre. Nothing to really be too concerned about. Even though David Johnson, I just think his workload is going to be tremendous, and at only 5K, I love that. And lastly, you got to talk about Mike Davis. I'm sure if you've watched any other content this week, all you've been hearing about is Mike Davis, but for good reason, because when you're only 4K and you're a guy that's been a workload running back with Christian McCaffrey out, and a guy that we've been playing week in and week out at higher salary, and now you're down to 4K, you just can't not play. I mean, we were playing the guy at $6,600, $7,000, $7,000, and if you want to not play him now that he's $4,000, go ahead, be my guest. But me personally, I'm not going to do that. I think that the risk outweighs the benefit. I don't think that there's a chance he doesn't get to where he should be at as far as paying off his salary at 4K, and I actually think he's going to be one of the top running backs on the slate, regardless of his salary. So. As far as my projections are concerned and where I have him on my priority list this week, I can't ignore playing some Mike Davis. Got to have him in your lineups. Moving along to the wide receiver position. we've already talked about some of the guys naturally that I'm playing because of, I'm talking about correlating with quarterbacks, but a lot of the guys we've been talking about are in this upper price tier. So we're going to talk about more of the cheap guys. Travis Fulgham's a guy that I have interest in for the Eagles this week, taking on the New York Giants. This game has a pretty heavy total, and Fulgham's seen his workload be pretty significant. I do like pairing him up with Carson Wentz. As you can see, Wentz is one of the guys that made my final cut as far as QBs I'm playing this week. And if I'm pairing him up with his weapons, I want Travis Fulgham to be the first guy I'm starting with. 7 targets, 11 targets, 10 targets, 13 targets, 19, 12, 19, 34 DK points. Alshon Jeffrey is coming back this week, but they're expected to ease him into action, so I don't think he's going to take away a lot of the workload from these guys. And the other guy that I'm looking to play alongside Fulgham, well, there's two, but my second option is definitely that in Jalen Reagor. I think Reagor is one of the top salary relief options at the wide receiver position this week. He's only 4.2K on DraftKings. I think he's underpriced. Last week we saw him get 6 targets, and he got in the end zone, and I think we could see a similar workload this week, if not more. I like Jalen Reagor a lot. I think the Eagles are going to be utilizing him in their offense, and then I do have some interest in the tight end as well in Dallas Goedert. So as far as the Eagles are concerned, I do think that we have a nice stacking opportunity with them. And I do think that we have a nice stacking opportunity with the Giants on the other end of the ball. I don't have Jones in my final player pool. However, I wouldn't hate it at all, honestly. I've talked about it throughout the week, and I do think it's viable. I do think I would be pairing up with first his option and Darius Slayton. Slayton, the number one option in this offense as far as I'm concerned, and I do think that he could have a big week in this matchup against the Eagles. He's the first guy I want to be putting in, but more specifically, I definitely have a ton of interest in Evan Ingram this week. Eagles have been one of the worst teams in the league against tight ends, and Evan Ingram's only at 4.5 and starting to see a lot more involvement in the offense. After only seeing 3 targets against Washington in Week 6, we've seen him get 9, 10, and 10 targets, getting in the end zone last week. And if we can get a similar workload out of him in Week 7 and Week 8 with that touchdown, instead of the 15 DK points, we're looking at 20 plus, and at only 4 or 5, I think he is a great option this week. So like him, other wide receivers that I have interest in kind of in a lower range, I mentioned having interest in Christian Kirk. He's definitely a viable option. John Brown, a viable option. And then I do like some of these options in this Raiders-Denver game because I do think that the target share is going to be very condensed. First guy I want to talk about is Jerry Jeudy. I do think that pairing him up with Drew Lock is viable this week. You can see Drew Lock did make my cut as far as QBs that I will have interest in. And I do think that the target share in this offense is very predictable. We've seen Jerry Jeudy the last 2 weeks get 10 targets, 14 targets, starting to become one of the favorite options of Drew Lock in this offense. I don't mind pairing him up with Tim Patrick on the other side. And we're looking at Patrick's once again, we can see the workload 7, 8, 4, 9 targets. He's involved. And then you can't forget about the tight end because I do think that Fant's a great option to throw in your Denver stacks as well. Seeing a good increased target share, 7 targets, 9 targets. Last week it was a little bit of a dud, but I do think that we've seen him get the target share and he just hasn't gotten the end zone. And I do think that as soon as he gets it in the end zone, that's really all you're waiting on. You're just waiting on that touchdown and he's going to pay off that salary in a major way. And then don't forget about the other side of the ball, stacking up Derek Carr with some of his weapons. You got to start with Nelson Aguilar. As far as wide receivers are concerned, he would be my favorite wide receiver. Ruggs and Renfro are taking, playing second fiddle to him as far as I'm concerned. 14, 14, 24, 13 DK points. But my favorite option is definitely the tight end and Darren Waller. Waller's a very athletic, he's just an athletic freak tight end. He's pretty much a wide receiver that plays tight end is the best way that I like to describe him. He gets downfield. He's got the target share, 7, 9, 6, 10 targets. And I think he's got a tremendous amount of upside in this one. When looking at the Vegas total for this game, it's up there, and I don't think it's going to get the same attention as some of the other games you talked about, like the Cardinals-Bills game. An applied opening total of 23.25 for the Raiders and 27.75 for the Raiders and 23.25 for the Broncos. And then when you're looking at the open of the over-under, it was at 51, and in the live, it's at 51. So it hasn't changed at all. And I do think that this is a viable game to be looking at and targeting. So I definitely like that game. And that pretty much rounds out my favorite options this week. The only last thing that I would mention is I do have some interest in Roethlisberger and these Pittsburgh Steelers. The options that I'm looking to go to are definitely first Deontay Johnson. I always have interest in Deontay Johnson because he's underpriced in my opinion. He's only 5'2" on DraftKings. And we saw him get 10 targets last week, 15 targets in week 7. He had a dud week in week 3, but I mean, 2 very high upside weeks. And then, of course, we can't forget about Claypool and Juju Smith-Schuster. All 3 of these wide receivers are viable. These guys are priced up a little bit more, but we've seen the upside that Claypool has. We've seen the upside that Juju has. And with the Vegas totals and how these guys are implied to put up points this week with a 26.5 implied live line, I definitely have interest in stacking up Big Ben with his wide receivers. But don't forget about Eric Ebron, because Eric Ebron is one of my favorite tight end plays of the week. I love him in this matchup. The Cincinnati Bengals have been very bad against the tight end position. Eric Ebron, another athletic tight end, similar to Darren Waller. Not in the same tier as Darren Waller, that's not what I'm saying, but he has the same sort of athletic background. He can get down the field. Unlike most tight ends that are kind of just limited to red zone work, we've seen Ebron be able to run those deep routes, and I think he has upside, and I like him a lot this week. So that's where I'm looking to go. That's my final look at this week. And those are the players that I'll be having exposure to. Looking forward to the slate. I'm excited. If you enjoyed this content, if you enjoyed the content throughout the week, hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and hit the notification bell so you'll be notified every time I release new videos. And then don't forget about my Patreon package linked below in the description. I got all my projections uploaded. I got all my sheets uploaded, ready and geared to go leading up to 1 o'clock. So go ahead and check that out if interested. I wish you guys all the best of luck in this week 10 slate, and we will see you when we go ahead and start breaking down next week.